Hey, welcome to Let's Unravel, and I'm your friend Christina. So, hot take, what screams fall to you? Is it pumpkin or is it apple? I swear, at this time of the year, anywhere I go, I see pumpkin this, pumpkin that, and now I feel like I see apple this, apple that. So, I'm dying to know your take. What screams fall to you, pumpkin or apple? Drop your thoughts in the comment below, and I'll let you know my thoughts at the end of this episode. Thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a friend of the podcast or a new listener, I just wanted to say welcome. So if you happen to have been here last week and even the week before, you would have noticed that we had our first guest appearance. Now, I want to let you know that we're going to keep the good times rolling. And what this means is we are going to be having more exciting new guests coming up on the show. We're going to be having more new exciting topics, and you're not going to want to miss a thing. So make sure you are subscribed to us at Let's Unravel Pod on YouTube. And make sure you're following us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now, don't forget, there will be a poll on Spotify stating what screams fall to you, pumpkin or apple. So make sure you are casting your vote, because at the end of the day, my thoughts are great, but it's you that decides which way the hot take actually goes. And I will say, Katie Bauer's hot take on is cereal a soup was actually quite controversial. So if you go back to watch part 1 and part 2, drop your thoughts on is cereal a soup, and you'll find out her thoughts at the end of part 2. So if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, drop your thoughts and comments below. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure you head over and give us a 5-star rating and let us know what you think of the show. Now, we are going to start having some exciting segments and news on our Instagram and TikTok page. So make sure you head over to Instagram or TikTok at Let's Unravel Pod and make sure you're following, because you can see snippets of the show, any new announcements, and at some point, very soon, we're going to be starting to have little segments over there as well, and you're not going to want to miss it. Let's jump into our favorite topic here at Let's Unravel, win of the week. And our win this week is fall is here. Yes, you heard me. Fall is here. Now, I hate to say it. I hate to be controversial, or maybe I love to be controversial. I'm not really sure which, but I have to say summer is my least favorite season out of the whole year. Fall is my favorite. And so to come into fall and to see all the pumpkin or apple stuff lining up in stores and aisles near you, I just want to say fall is my favorite time of the year, whether it's the fashion or whether it's because I know Thanksgiving is coming up. And I have to say, Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays. Anyways, so fall is here. That is our win of the week this week. And I want to hear about your win of the weeks. So feel free to drop comments on how you're winning in life. Maybe you're also enjoying that it's fall. Maybe you got a free coffee at Starbucks. Maybe you just got your master's. Whatever the case may be, drop your wins of the week. And who knows, maybe I'll just read your win of the week here on the show. And if you don't feel comfortable dropping a comment, feel free to send me a DM. I'd be happy to read your win of the week anonymously, or if there's a different name that you want to go by. But if you ask me to say the word see more butts, we are going to have a problem. Anyways, moving forward, let's jump into our topic of the week. Or should I say, what are we unraveling today? So grab your cup of coffee, grab your cup of tea, or maybe you're cleaning, grab your vacuum, whichever works best for you. And let's jump into our topic of the week. So what are we unraveling today? Let's unravel laser focus. Now, the last 2 episodes were really great, really exciting, and monumental for our show. We had our first guest appearance, Katie Bauer, and we got to take a glimpse into the world of nursing. We even got to really hone into what it looked like to be a NICU nurse. And it was really exciting to see from a different person's perspective what life in their 20s look like. And during the time frame of when we recorded and released those episodes, the tragic event of Charlie Kirk's death took place. Now, this podcast is not political in nature, though it felt inhumane not to acknowledge the death of an individual who was taken in front of the world's eyes. And you might notice my eyes drift down. I have written some of these things out. Now, regardless of what side you stand on, whether Republican or Democrat, whether liberal or conservative, one thing is true that we can acknowledge. Charlie Kirk stood for something. You might not have liked what he stood for, though he never shied away from what he stood for. In fact, it's the very thing that made him magnetic. Now, in the aftermath of his death, it's left many people with certain feelings. Maybe you're sick of hearing his name, or maybe you're riddled with questions. And one of those questions may be, what do you stand for? This question is actually a question that has been used by one of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. Yes, the Alexander Hamilton that in fact inspired Hamilton the musical. And if you want a quick background background on Alexander Hamilton, I do recommend you check out Hamilton the musical. This question was not only just asked by Alexander Hamilton, but it was again used by Malcolm X. And in the words of Alexander Hamilton, those who stand for nothing fall for anything. So I will acknowledge I am asking a very large question. What do you stand for? And regardless of age, a perfect example is we can look at someone like Charlie Kirk. He stood for purpose. Now, you may not have liked his purpose. His purpose was, in fact, his faith and the younger generation. But if we look at others, such as our founding fathers, and if we look at Alexander Hamilton in particular, what did they stand for? What they stood for and what their purpose was freedom and liberty. Now, it wouldn't be fair to make a call like this to you without first identifying what purpose is. And so if you're anything like me, purpose and dreams always felt so interchangeable. And I know in the very beginning of this episode, it was very heavy because whenever you talk about death, it's heavy. And even when we talk about tragic events, it's heavy. But the silver lining in all of this is it shakes us awake. It makes us ask hard questions because at the end of the day, we want people to stand for something. Even if you don't necessarily agree what others stand for, what makes people magnetic is the fact that they have the confidence to stand for something. And that is what I want for you. I want you to have confidence to stand for something. And what we can do at Let's Unravel is be a safe place to have conversations where we can be respectful and also bring civility to our conversations, where we can be respectful around different thoughts and issues. And so going back to this idea of it not being fair to ask you, what do you stand for, without first diving deep into these concepts of purpose and dreams. And so what I want to do in this moment right here is identify what is purpose. And if you're anything like me, like I had said, purpose and dreams always seemed interchangeable, but really they're nothing alike. You see, dreams, they are milestones, they're locations, they're these destinations of things that we can get to or we hold. And that is the beauty of dreams, is you can get to them, you can arrive. Now, the difference with purpose is what drives us. It's a state of mind. It's like gratitude, except purpose, there's a fire to it. It's the thing that makes you get out of bed in the morning. It's the thing that makes you want to be disciplined. And it's purpose, it's fulfillment within life. We've talked about dreams before on the show. We even talked about them with Katie. And if there's one thing I've learned in my 20s is that dreams evolve over time. They do. I talked about how my dream and what I thought my passion was to write movies and to go to Hollywood and to, really put out like this big movie somewhere. And what I've learned over the last 8 years of being in my 20s is I love movies and I thought making movies was the dream. And what I realized is those were the dreams, but my purpose was something different. And what purpose does is it brings you fulfillment and you can love what you do. But what my purpose was in all of this, in every odd job I've had, whenever I worked in retail, when I worked at an accounting firm, when I worked at a startup, is I had realized I loved to have conversations with people. I loved to understand how people were thinking. I loved to see how they came to the conclusions that they had. There's been many times where I've had friends with people that are vastly different than me. We've had very different ways of viewing the world, very different ways in which we've come to conclusions. But I've never undervalued that friendship because we had different political stances. In fact, I've valued it because it's brought me into a whole nother world of insight. And actually what it's done is build compassion in me, that I'm able to see and understand how someone got from point A to point B and eventually got to point Z. And one of the most beautiful things that you can have in life is have a variety of people, a variety of walks of life, whether in different careers, a variety of ways people think. It's what sharpens us. It's what brings us closer together. One of my favorite things about learning in school and history was learning about America and how America was supposed to be this melting pot. It was supposed to be a variety of ethnicities coming together, cultures, and we merged and we became Americans. And that was one of my favorite ideas and concepts, was this idea of being a melting pot, about getting to see different people's views and opinions. And what's been so sad to watch is how we've had this inability to be civil with each other. We've had the inability to respect or even really listen to each other. And what the dream behind Let's Unravel has always been was to be a place of connection, a place of community. But we need to be open to allow others to speak, because if you want to be heard, sometimes you first have to listen. And so going back to this concept of dreams and purpose, from the time I was 16 to 17 years old, I was working at a Dunkin' Donuts nuts. And I remember the first time my manager had given me the task to train the new hire. And I remember going home that night and I remember talking to my mom and I remember realizing I loved to train people. I loved to teach. I loved to talk. I love to talk, start a podcast. But ultimately, I loved to train people. I loved to equip people to have skills. And ultimately, I love to be able to find new ways to communicate with people. One of the coolest things about training people is learning how they learn. And a lot of times people will know the best ways that they learn and pick up new skills, habits, whatever the case may be. And to be able to become a communicator where you can really change into whatever the person is that you're trying to communicate with and adapt to what they need is such a beautiful and insightful tool. And so, like I said, going back to dreams and going back to purpose, would I love to write a movie? Absolutely. Who knows? Maybe one day I will. But what's cool about purpose is more than just dreams. Dreams can evolve over time, but purpose is what drives us. And very rarely does your purpose change. Occasionally you'll have people where it'll be as if it's like the flip of a switch where their purpose drastically changes. But I believe for a majority of us, purpose rarely changes because ultimately with purpose, it brings this refinement of who you are. It brings you alive. And we'll discuss on how to know and how to find purpose. But ultimately, what I've learned for me is I've always felt like maybe I didn't quite fit. Maybe it was working within different companies. Maybe it was being around certain friends, but being this missing piece, feeling lost, feeling like you don't belong. But when you find purpose, it's amazing how purpose will draw you to the people that you're meant to be with, the people that are going to cheer you on and push you forward. So bringing back this idea of the difference between dreams and purpose. Dreams can evolve, but purpose doesn't stop. Purpose is the thing that wakes you up in the morning excited to go. And so it wouldn't be let's unravel if I didn't give you a definition of a word. So the definition of purpose is the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. Now, the definition of dreams is a cherished aspiration, ambition, or ideal. Now, you see how those definitions are vastly different from each other, where if you notice purpose, it's the reason, whereas dreams, it's an aspiration, it's an ambition. And that is the beauty because you can have dreams that lie within your purpose. And when I started to realize my purpose, one of the things I love more than anything is writing. Writing, whether it's writing the show, I've taken time to write a manuscript of a novel. And the moment I sat down and actually dedicated myself to writing my very first manuscript, which it hasn't been published yet, it's in the works. But from the moment I sat down and I wrote my very first manuscript, and as soon as I was going through, it wasn't the first chapter and it wasn't the third, but by the time I was somewhere around the fourth and fifth chapter, it was like I realized I finally found what I had been looking for. I finally had put the missing pieces together and I realized it was writing. Writing was always the purpose. I wanted to make movies, but where did it start with movies? It was the writing. It was the creativity behind that. What was the other things that when I was working in other companies and I was a trainer, it was about connection. It was about people. It was always about people. And it was funny because even at times when I should have left companies, I'm going to out myself here. If there's one thing to describe me, I am overcommitted. Like there's been times where my mom has said, like, Christina, you'll go down with the Titanic. Like that is how committed to things I can be sometimes, where maybe I should have jumped ship a long time ago, whether it's been working in various companies. But the truth is, the reason why a lot of times I don't want to leave is because of the people. Because everywhere I've worked, I have met incredible people and I've had incredible conversations. Some of my favorite people I met at a retail store. And then any kind of person I've had some type of relationship, connection, friendship, whatever the case may be, they have made a lasting impression on me. Some of the people that have challenged me the most in my life was when I was working at a startup. It was just a whole different way of thinking people had, and it was always this way of propelling you forward. And that is the beauty about getting to have connections with people, is you never know who is going to be the person that unlocks or propels you forward into the direction that you're meant to go in. And of course, it wouldn't be me if I didn't have some type of like TV shows or movies to reference to tie all these thoughts together, because it's the only way I know how to process things is I always need to be able to visualize it. And the best way to visualize things is like I said, I love to watch movies. I wanted to go make movies, sue me. Don't sue me. Anyways, but ultimately, my love of movies, my love of TV shows, it always plays out these scenarios in my head. So still holding on to these ideas of the difference between dreams and purpose. When I look at the show Gilmore Girls, Fallen, from Connecticut. And I'm sure you could have heard my whole rant about Gilmore Girls in last week's episode. If you want to check that out, by all means. So Rory. Now, I am going to spoil the show, so feel free to skip past this if you are in the middle of watching Gilmore Girls for the first time. But Rory, so she is the daughter of Lorelai. One of the first things that you learn about Rory in like episode 1, season 1, is how her dream is to go to Harvard. But what's interesting is over the course of several seasons, and even to the point where she applies to go to Harvard, she doesn't make it. She can't get into Harvard. In this moment, it's like her dreams change. And what does she end up doing? She ends up going to Yale, and she makes a whole life for herself there, and we follow her through that part. But what's so interesting is in the beginning of the show, the dream, everything lied at Harvard. That was what it was always going to be about, was about how she was going to get to Harvard. In a lot of ways, I think we could have mistaked her purpose for going to Harvard. But really, the show actually tells us exactly what her purpose is. It wasn't about going to Harvard. Her purpose was always about writing. I mean, you see that from the beginning of the show where everything she did revolved around writing. It was about reading. It was about writing because great leaders are readers. That is not my quote. Now, I can't tell you whose quote that was. It was not mine. I promise you that. That would have been, if that was mine, I'd be putting that on a t-shirt or something everywhere. But I have tried to live by that quote. Well, it's also true for writers. Great writers are great readers. I mean, it's true for so many things. So if you are someone that you want to be a leader, read a book. If you are someone that wants to be a writer, read a book. It'll be amazing how it expands your horizon. Now, going back to Rory, she wanted to be a writer. So what did she do? She was reading a lot. That is like her hobby in the show. And her purpose would lie behind that reading. It was the writing. And that was what was so important, is every area of life she did writing. So whether she was in high school writing for the newspaper, whether it was getting to college and doing internships, and ultimately when you get to the revival of the show, what is she doing? She is writing. Her purpose was always writing. Her purpose was in the words. And that was the difference, because with purpose, it was about writing. So it didn't matter what the end goal was. It didn't matter if it was for a paper. It didn't matter if it was in a book. The purpose was writing. Now, oftentimes your dreams will fall into your purpose. So when we move into my next movie metaphor, is I finally saw the new Superman movie that came out. I believe the director was James Gunn. It was phenomenal. It's on HBO Max. Check it out. I would say all the hype that it was given, it was well worth it. And so even in the short amount of time that it had to try to expand on all these different ideas, introduce all these different characters, within the first few seconds of the movie, it introduces us to Clark Kent / Superman's dream. His dream is to fulfill the wishes of his parents. Now, granted, and I don't want to spoil the movie for anybody, but definitely check it out, but there is a certain idea that he has of what this dream is going to look like, and he does everything in his power to uphold it until Lex Luther gets a hold of what that dream is. And all of a sudden, he opens Clark Kent's eyes / Superman to more than meets the eye with what he initially thought his dream was. Next thing you know, Clark Kent's world comes crashing down because he thought his dream was going to look one way, and then he realizes there was a misinterpretation of what that dream was. Now, I'm talking in circles because I'm trying not to give anything away of the movie, so definitely check that movie out. But what we find out is Clark Kent's purpose ultimately is he wants to do good. He wants to be kindness. I mean, it's funny because one of my favorite parts in the movie is there's this monster attacking Metropolis, and Superman is trying to get everybody out of the way, and he saves a squirrel. And I think that is symbolic of the whole movie because he is supposed to be this beacon of hope. He's supposed to be the superhero. And what is so special about the character is even there's that great line about how kindness is punk rock. And in this moment, what does he do? He saves a squirrel, a defenseless little squirrel. And I think that is what is so unique. And that is what drives him, is his purpose is kindness. It's goodness. What's so unique about this version of Superman in this movie is you really get to see this very human part of Clark Kent, even though he's not human. But with this variation of Superman and with Clark Kent, you get to see that very human side of him, that whole little monologue he says to Lex Luther about being human. His purpose is he wants to help the world through the means in which he has. And that is something that drives his purpose. So what he realizes is the dream that he had eventually evolves, but it's the purpose that still remains. He, from the very beginning, he wanted to do good. And so maybe the first dream didn't align with the purpose, but what's so important about purpose is even though if your dreams don't align, your dreams will eventually evolve to align with your purpose. if you allow it. Now, this whole idea of Superman wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about Lex Luther. So in the top of this episode, I was asking you this question: what do you stand for? And something that is so polarizing about superhero movies is, if you notice, especially with Superman, is Lex Luther, Superman, they stand for something. So Superman, he stands for goodness, he stands for kindness, and Lex Luther stands for Lex Luther. But the point is, if you notice, Superman has a following, and so does Lex Luther. And ultimately, what makes people so magnetic is the confidence to stand for something. So like I said, what do you stand for? Or what do you want to stand for? When you look at these two individuals and they're standing for something, Superman stands for this idea of he believes in people. I mean, you even see Lois Lane say, like, you see the good in everybody. And that's what he stands for. He stands for seeing the good in people, that even though people can do horrible things, there's still a lot of people that will do incredibly great things as well. And then you have someone like Lex Luther who can only see or operate out of his own envy because he can't be what Superman is. He has an inability to see anything beyond himself. Now, I'm gonna pause for a minute because we have talked about dreams, we've talked about purpose, and I keep talking over and over about the question of what do you stand for? Because if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And now, I'm sure if you're anything like me, you're probably about to like punch the screen and be like, okay, Christina, what does any of this have to do with laser focus? I said we were going to be unraveling laser focus, and I've talked about dreams, I've talked about purpose, I've talked about Superman, and the thing is, all of this is the prequel to get to focus. Okay, maybe that's not correct. But ultimately, we have to lay the foundation of what dreams and purpose are, because in order to get to focus, you have to have purpose. So where does focus fall in all of this? How do you stand for something? How do you stand for a purpose without having focus? Now, the definition of focus is the center of interest or activity. Now, if you're anything like me and you need a visual, because that's of course what I'm going to do, is have you ever tried to take a picture on your phone? Okay, I do realize how ridiculous that sounds, seeing as we are the iPhone age. Anyways, so if you have ever tried to take a picture on your iPhone, or maybe you're one of those Samsung users. If you're a Samsung user, I am so sorry for you. And if you have a problem with that, feel free to drop a comment below. Anyways, so if you have ever tried to take a picture on your smartphone, what is the first thing that you do? Now, if you say you just take a picture, that is utter travesty right there, because I'm telling you, there ain't no way your photo is gonna be focused. See what I did right there? And so what is the first thing that you do when you go to take a photo? You tap on the screen. You tap on whatever the object is that you're trying to get into focus. Now, because I've worked with cameras, and the first time I ever really got this visual in my head about cameras was when I was working at a film internship. I remember the first time I'd seen this camera like autofocus, and it was really cool to see how it made like this sound and it would focus on the actor. And it was this visual in my mind that I never forgot. Just like with the smartphone, when you tap on the screen to focus on an object or a person, and the reason why we tap on the screen to do that, because like you said, you're trying to focus them into the photo. Otherwise, it would be blurry, because the whole purpose of the photo is to capture the moment. So when you discover purpose, you find a reason to focus. And then the next thing that you'll need is discipline. Now we'll talk about discipline a whole nother episode. With purpose, you don't have purpose if you don't have focus. Purpose can go hand in hand with focus. I mean, a perfect example is my dad. He has always had a woodworking shop, and one of the tools he has is like a laser level, and he would use this laser to project it on a wall to show where things would be. Why? Because we needed to focus on where things were going. You think of this idea about laser focus. It's great to be able to see where you're going. And a lot of times when you know what purpose is, purpose can project us to what our focus is. So now, as we've talked about purpose, dreams, focus, and one of the biggest questions I used to ask all the time in my early 20s was, what is my purpose? How do you know that you found what your purpose is? And these are some really great questions that you can ask yourself. Now, very rarely are you going to find purpose within noise. And finding purpose, it's a moment of clarity. Clarity can provide you with purpose. And so when you take some time, and one of the best things you can do is to sit with your thoughts, whether it's journaling, whether it's going for a walk. Highly recommend going for a walk in a park or somewhere and taking a few moments to think about some of these questions, and I'll go through them. So what makes you come alive? I talked about this when I was 17 and I first started to train people. And that was something I realized that every time I'd come home, every time I got to make some type of training curriculum or manual, it was the something that made me come alive. So ask yourself, what makes you come alive? Another great question is, what do you love to do? There's so many people that are successful that if you ask them, like, why are you doing whatever you're doing? And they're like, I love it. And there was a real passion behind it. To find purpose is to understand there's a love of something at the root of it. I mean, even with podcasting, I love writing. That is the root of all of this, is I love to write. I love the way words come to life and they can give people such clarity. And so another great question is, what's bigger than you? I believe every person has a purpose. There's no such thing as a useless person. I just believe ultimately some people are underutilized. There's been times in my life, and we've talked about mentors on previous episodes. There's been times in my life where people have come alongside me and I would have much rather been left alone or be quote unquote like useless to a situation, but people have been like, nope, I'm gonna teach and I'm gonna equip you. There's no such thing as a useless person. Every person has a purpose, but it's your job to find your purpose. When you look at purpose, what is bigger than you? So even with this whole podcast, this podcast is so much bigger than me. The moment someone listens to this podcast, the moment you listen to this podcast, it has become so much bigger than me, because I could have kept all these thoughts in a nice, neat little diary and went along with my day, but I stopped to share these conversations. And so in this moment, these writings have become so much more than me. My last question, that's actually not a question, it's more of a statement, but in silence, you'll find clarity. Clarity produces purpose. You remove distractions, take a walk, and you'll be amazed at what you find. I'm telling you, you ask yourself these questions, you are going to unearth something, and purpose is one of the most beautiful gifts life can give you, because it brings you fulfillment. It brings you something beyond yourself. And as humans, we're meant for so much more. We really are. And so I have put so many thoughts into this episode. I've asked you so many questions, but if there's one thing I would desperately love for you to know, it's that let's unravel the purpose. The purpose of this podcast is to build a conversation with respect and civility, a place to grow and become builders, and to find missing pieces because you're needed here. So if there is one thing I wanted you to take away, is I want you to know what the heart of Let's Unravel is. And that is something that I believe needs to be spoken more about in some of these episodes, is how important it is to build a conversation, how important it is to be a place to grow builders. It's so beautiful to build something. Coming from a startup, coming from creating this podcast, there is nothing more rewarding than building something, doing something really hard, and then getting to see the fruit of your labor. There's just nothing better. And as one of those kids that never felt like they quite fit in places, there's nothing better than being able to find a place that you can call your own, and you no longer have to be that missing puzzle piece anymore. You can fit perfectly here. All are welcomed. So my favorite thing to do is to sum this whole podcast up into one phrase. An episode in a phrase is purpose propels us to focus. All right. So without any further ado, let's jump into sticky thoughts, thoughts that stick. So 1, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. 2, dreams are milestones and purpose drives us. 3, purpose propels us to focus. Last but certainly not least, 4, it's the questions, it's the conversations, and it's the ability to keep talking to each other that guides us to finding purpose, along with a moment of clarity. So thanks for hanging out with me today, and thank you for letting me talk to you about Superman, Gilmore Girls, and all about laser focus. I'd love to connect with you more. You can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the podcast show in general, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a really long way in boosting the algorithm. Also, please don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube to stay up to date on all new episodes. We have new episodes coming out every single Thursday, and you're not going to want to miss a thing. Well, it's that time of the episode to give you my hot take on what screams fall to me, pumpkin or apple. I have to say pumpkin muffins and pumpkin lattes. I think that's where I'm lying, even though I will make an exception for an apple fritter. So after all, I guess I'm team pumpkin. Anyways, that's all. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you next week with another new episode. Talk to you later. Bye.